marketed in France.
Now, moving on, there's been a lot of coverage of the sow crates and the fact that a ban will come in 2013. That's been seen on the Country 99 TV website. It's about time a decision like this was made. It's been talked about for ages.
Well, I guess animal welfare is not really an issue. That's, you know, you just have to go along with that. And the Minister's probably correct. But his gamble that the consumer and the industry's gamble, for that matter, that the consumer will pay for it is yet to be seen. We've got a 3-year period and obviously things can change on the price front, but the usual evidence is that people will not in fact move very quickly to pay more, so it's not like it's going to go up by $1 or $2 a kilo. So maybe the consumer will accept it by the time it comes in. But yeah, it's an interesting move, and it's usually one that you wouldn't gamble on if you're in the market.
No. What do you think, Allison? It's a victory for animal welfare protesters, isn't it?
Yes, I think so. Well, that sounds a bit extreme. I think consumers have been concerned about it worldwide, haven't they? And we've been a bit slow to take it up. Pork hasn't been that expensive compared with some of the other cuts of meat. So I think a little movement in price would be acceptable.
And consumers would be happy to know that the domestic industry is doing something about these issues which have been in the media so much recently.
And I think they'll move on to other animals too, I think. I think you'll see movements in other areas besides
but in the poultry industry, for example.
Yes, but I think dairy farming is going to face up to a few things soon.
So it'll be a wider level of questioning farming practices.
Yes, I think so.
That we may see.
It could go too far. I think with eggs now it's become quite confusing in the supermarket with such a spread of different ranges of eggs, and that's certainly not being driven by price, that's for sure. But you've now got a full range, but you can go too far. They found this in America.
Right. Well, moving on. Nevil, Don Nicholson, the Federated Farmers President, he's been questioning rapid consolidation in the grain industry. And there are some calls from some grain growers for the Commerce Commission to take a closer look. What do you think?
Always get a bit worried when farmers delve into this side of the industry. They don't own their own grain company, so they have to accept it. Grain around the world is dominated by 3 or 4 big players. You've got 2 in New Zealand, 1 from Canada, which has just taken over operations in Australia. If they haven't got their own force, there's no point in them going to the government to try and sort this out. They either have to accept the fact that we still import grain, the big grain merchants dominate world trade, and they should organise themselves so that they get the kind of prices that we're paying for the imports.
Right. The grain industry is going to remain fairly minor in New Zealand, isn't it? Just due to climatic reasons and so forth. Yeah.
But of course it could become more important. You know, we were talking earlier about the Waikato. There are other areas where you can go grow grains, and I think it could be done as some parts of the country dry out.
Right. Well, moving on, the UN climate talks in Cancun in Mexico. Environment Minister Nick Smith, he said in the New Zealand Herald, he thought it was helpful that there wasn't the hype about these negotiations that there was about Copenhagen last year. Do you think much is likely to come out of the talks, Allison?
I think it's interesting that comment is being touted by a lot of the richer countries, and I think some of the poorer countries probably have a different view. I think it's very short-sighted to think that they're going to go for limited outcomes. Why not go in there in a positive way to think that they're actually going to effect some change?
Do you think they've learned a lesson from Copenhagen last year?
Oh, certainly. I think in all the world discussions so far this year, G20 is a classic example. If you've got high expectations, nothing will come out of it. If you've got low expectations, you might get something. But the forces in the world at the moment are not agreeable to any kind of agreement. You look at currency, you look at other economic things, and climate change is no different. I don't think hardly any country is wanting to bend on the position they've already taken, and the areas of world cooperation seem to be diminishing rather than rising at the moment.
Well, that's certainly being seen in some of the free trade agreement talks, isn't it?
Well, definitely free trade bilateral agreements are really just a couple of countries getting together, and to widen them out into a multilateral one looks very hard indeed. The talks that have been going on in Auckland, we don't expect to get any news out of these sort of negotiations, but they don't seem to be moving very fast either.
No, but it's still a huge prize, isn't it, to get a Trans-Pacific partnership, even if you don't get all countries agreeing on all issues. Just the fact that they're talking and making moves towards freeing up some of the trading areas is very significant.
We're in a very strong position because trade barriers are not really an issue for New Zealand, but getting access to other markets is. And if you've got the high ground, which we have in the TPP, you can then say to other countries, well, you've got to cave in a bit, you've got to give something up. And that's where the test really comes. And it doesn't matter how big those countries are. You know, Korea recently had to bend in with America. They walked away from a trade deal but then got back together within a few weeks.
So we might see more of this sort of behaviour in the future, or...?
I think so. The key to it is going to be in Asia Pacific, isn't going to be the United States, it's going to be Japan, and how far Japan is going to cave in to its farming lobby, or not cave in, but you know, give in to what the rest of the world want, which is for them to give up the protection of their agricultural sector.
And they won't do that easily. They won't go
Well,
quietly.
I think the politicians in big business, you know, the big exporting businesses, their car industry, they certainly want it. It's a matter of the Japanese wider public accepting the fact that they can't go on forever the way they're doing it.
Right. Well, we'll watch and see what happens there. Coming up after the break, it's You Beauty or a Bollocking. See who wins, who loses when we return. Stay with us. Welcome back to Straight Talk. Now it's on to You Beauty, praise or a bollocking, the opposite. What do you have, Allison? A beauty for us this week.
Yes, well, strangely enough, the Salvation Army, they have a farm that was gifted to them down by somewhere near Gore, and they have the Edmund Jeff Training Award. It's $7,000 that goes to some deserving young person who wants to train in the agricultural industry. So they've just announced that. That's
great. That's a very significant help in the right direction for someone who wants to make a career in agriculture.
Well, the young person who's got it is Hamish from Cave, and he's just completed his degree at Lincoln. So they like to help struggling young people. They have 5 or 6 cadets on that farm. It's about 2,000 hectares apparently, 20,000 stock units.
It sounds a great initiative.
Good training scheme for young people.
Yeah. But I also believe you might have a bollocking, and it might be just a little bit over the Tasman. Oh, we like bashing the Australians. So, well, while I was over there just recently, stories in the paper about how they're going to stop taking our kiwi fruit because of the PSA, and then, of course, the apple industry, getting their cozies in a coil over all these Kiwis coming across with their products. Yeah. But don't they recognise that with the apples, the battle is over? I hope so, yes. But there'll be a few grizzles still, I'm sure. Yeah. What do you think, Neville? It's wicked what goes on in Australia. I was over there when the banana crop got wiped out and you couldn't buy a banana. Well, you could buy one, it costs about $10. They forbid the importation of bananas, which is the world's most traded fruit. They probably forbid oranges for that matter. New Zealand onions is another one. Yet we can buy beans from Australia. I mean, I don't think the average consumer there understands that they're being what they're losing out on. They certainly pay a higher price and they get lower quality. The same goes in Canada, I think. And tomatoes, that's a huge issue for our own tomato growers here, that the Australian tomatoes can come in at certain times of the year at very cheap prices, often not very good quality. No. But they're the only crop available to consumers unless they want to pay a lot for the locally grown ones. Well, all these fruits are seasonal. Of course, Australia has huge climatic advantages in certain types of fruit, you know, mangoes, for example, that sort of thing. But I think people have got to get a bit straight here. Consumers can be easily misled by media stories, scare stories about disease and so on. But most of these diseases aren't carried by the actual fruit. No. It could be other means of transport and that sort of thing, but that can be dealt with pretty quickly. Right. What's the Australian objection to our onions? What I have no idea. Don't they like about them? Horticulture New Zealand put out a list and they said, oh, forget about the apples, you know, that's a good one, we've won. But there's another 40 vegetables and fruits that they listed all around the world. You know, Japan's a key
key offender in this regard too.
Right. Allison, do you think New Zealand needs to do a bit more tough talking with our Australian counterparts in terms of free trade agreements, closer economic relations? They really need to be doing more than paying lip service to these ideas.
Yes. I mean, it's so close now. I mean, you go over there, all the ads are the same. There's so much, all the shops are the same. There's so much closer ties.
Yes.
But the food is the one that seems to be the stumbling block, doesn't it?
Yep.
So how do you think we can progress this further, Neville?
Well, it's interesting the attitude of the politicians to the Apples decision, because they know, as a member of the Cairns Group, in fact they're probably the leader of the Cairns Group, that Australia has to stand up in favour of the WTO and play by the rules. And so it's a rather unpalatable thing, but they've got to tell the consumers that this is the real world. And if Australia wants to benefit from free trade, they've got to play the game.
Absolutely. Now, Neville, coming on to you. You've got a beauty, a bollocking. What's it to be this week?
It's a bit of a hard one, because we remember how the kiwi fruit industry started up in New Zealand, then spread around the world, and then they became our competitors. Well, it could be that the wine industry, we've got the advantage of some research by the University of Auckland. They found what they call a wild yeast in our wine and Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc. This has been studied by scientists, and it was announced earlier this week that a Danish company that provides ingredients to companies around the world are now selling this as a frozen yeast to winemakers, and the countries that are likely to pick up on it most are in France. Can you believe that?
Strange that.
So it could be you were getting New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs coming out of Sancerre and other places in France. So I don't know. It's good, obviously, for the researcher and the
there will be some export earnings from it, but
obviously,
looking further down the track, intellectual property concerns.
Well, it could be flooded in New Zealand wine. Not made in New Zealand.
Yeah. Well, what do you think, Allison?
Can you get royalties on it?
Yes.
Yeah. But it's not a very good thought, is it? Especially, as Neville says, with what's happened with the kiwi fruit industry. If only we had been able to trademark or patent that. Are there any other indications of other areas where we should be being more careful and keeping closer to our chest?
Well, I think with food ingredients companies operate pretty much under the radar, and I don't see why we shouldn't have our own one. Fonterra's very big in this, but we need to be clever, and maybe we do have to work with the Danes and the Dutch. They're very good at it as well. But I've noticed that a lot of these companies, we could easily match what they're doing.
Working smarter is what it's all about. Well, that's all we have time for this week. Thanks to my guests, former agricultural journalist turned journalism tutor, Dr. Allison Oosterman, and National Business Review editor, Nevil Gibson. Thanks to you for watching. Please email your comments to country99tv.co.nz. Check out my blog there, and we'll see you next time.